welcome to the PhantomFocus Roundtable. My name is Mike Rodriguez. I'm the host of the AudioNowcast Pro audio podcast. And today we're going to be visiting with a bunch of PhantomFocus system users. I had Carl on my podcast and we had a great time, and we decided for AES to kind of do something kind of fun. And we're going to talk about audio and monitoring and how we listen. But before we get going, let's introduce the panel. Joining us first from Spokane, Washington is Jimmy Hill.
How's it going? Yes, my name's Jimmy Hill. I'm from Amplified Wax Recording Studios here in Spokane. It's a husband and wife operation, which I've been building for the last 17 years or so. And yeah, thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be with such great, esteemed people.
It's our pleasure. Following him, we have Mr. Richard Furch from Los Angeles, California.
Yep, I'm here at the Mix House in Encino, Los Angeles. Yeah, well, making them go bump in the night, bunch of hip hop, R&B, that kind of stuff. Mostly mixing here, and made my way to the PhantomFocus system. Oh my, 10 years ago.
No,
that's great.
No.
Yeah.
And next on the panel is Mr. Doug Sarratt from Nashville, Tennessee.
Hi, I'm Doug, and I work at Uno Mas Studio. Carl put in a system for me several years ago, and I got a fresh upgrade last year, and am loving what I'm hearing, and excited to talk about the system.
That's great. And finally, we have Bob Bullock from Nashville, Tennessee.
I'm Bob Bullock. I have a studio called Cool Springs Mix. In fact, it's my third studio that Carl has built for me. My first studio, I think, goes back to 2001. This is the third and finest, but they've all been fantastic. I mostly mix here. Occasionally I do some overdubs, but generally it's a mix and editing suite, and it's a perfect control room for mixing.
That's great. Well, I am more than humbled to be amongst all you guys in your fabulous rooms, and I'm looking forward to everything that we're going to talk about. Before we start talking about monitors, let's set it all the way back. I want to ask you guys, how do you listen to your monitors? Are you very surgical in the way you listen, or do you kind of have a little macro, kind of step back a little and just kind of let it kind of blend in? Different people mix different ways. How do you guys listen to your monitors? Let's start with you, Bob.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, the reason I'm so thrilled to have my own mix environment, I'm sure that's true for everybody in this group, is I feel I have real control over what I do, because I know the room. It's very accurate. If I want to go a particular direction with the environment, the sonic environment I want the mix to be, I know I can go there. I can make things wetter, drier. Imaging is so accurate that I can place things wherever I want them to be in the stereo image, and so I don't really use other systems. I mean, on occasion I might just play something before I sign off on it, like people do in the car, or on the laptop satellite speakers or something. But 95% of the time I just use my PhantomFocus system for mixing, and I trust the accuracy of it. I feel like what I think I have is how it's going to translate to other places.
Fantastic. Jimmy, let me ask you, when you sit down and you listen to something, what is that process? What are you listening for when you're studying your mix?
Well, I do a lot of heavy music, a lot of guitars and stuff. So I'm listening for how the vocals are playing with the guitars, because there's so much, sonic real estate being taken up by those like 5150s and the big Marshall stacks and stuff. So one thing that I really like about this system is I feel like I can pull the fader up and I hear the vocal come forward or back, and I don't know if I've ever been able to do that with monitors where you can literally place where the vocal sits, and it's insane. I mean, so I can really, it's a surreal experience, and I'll play with that. I'll do that where maybe in the choruses I'll bring things forward, and I'm not using like more compression or something. It's just I'm just placing them, and it's kind of moving and changing. But the low end is obviously a big part of my music, the kick and the bass, and you know, sometimes things get pretty chaotic with the metal bands and things that I do. So being able to carve out those ranges down there and the kick and the bass, which one is above, which one is below, I've never been able to do that without this system. And my mixes have just exploded in quality since I've been able to hear that kind of stuff. So
Richard, how about you? When you sit down and you listen, how are you listening to your speakers?
It's an interesting question. I personally believe in something that I call body impact mixing. I don't know if I certainly probably didn't invent that term, but I do.
That sounds amazing.
It just you know, it's the kind of idea that you have a set playback gain that I don't normally play with. And at that level, basically, the record has to happen. It has to make some physical impact on me. Then I know I'm in the ballpark. Basically, I always tell people, you know, if you have a kick drum, it's not there just because somebody put a kick in, but it has to do something in this record. And if I hear that at this specific level on my system, which as well obviously has an amazing low end response, then I get this visceral experience out of my mix. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. On one hand, I get this impact that I'm looking for. I mean, of course, I need to do my job, because if the impact is not there, then, well, then it's not in the record, right? But at the same time, obviously, you have this very, very accurate sound field, like Bob was saying, where basically you can move a pan part by like, I don't know, I mean, I work in Pro Tools, so by like 2-3 notches, and you hear every single thing just move around exactly where you want it to be. It's almost like this Minority Report thing. Remember when Tom Cruise stands in front of like his wall? Right. You just put this one over there and this one over there.
That's coming next year.
And then you kind of mix the song when you're done. That's kind of how I listen to it.
That's fantastic. Doug, how about you? When you're over there at your studio, Uno Mas, how do you listen to your speakers?
I generally keep a good eye on my dB level, just so that I don't get too crazy loud. I start loud and end up, once I feel comfortable that I've cleaned up everything that I can, then I can turn it down and feel confident about what my balances are going to be. And to what Richard was saying, man, the placement and the panning within the stereo field is just ridiculous. It's so obvious with just 2 or 3 clicks how much room you can not carve out, but kind of carve out to make everything be heard. And it's just really exciting and satisfying to do, and knowing that it translates to other systems so well. I will put on a pair of headphones just because I've got a Grace monitor controller, and I use it to do a headphone out mix and check it that way too, just because so much is going on in earbuds and whatnot these days. So I want to try to accommodate that as well.
So everybody has their own unique way of listening to their monitors, and you guys all have these amazing PhantomFocus systems. Let's step back. Like, what were some of the problems that you had with your old system? I mean, obviously, you know, the PhantomFocus solves so many problems, but does anybody, you know, can you tell me an incident, or can you tell me some of the problems that you had with the old system? We'll start with you, Jimmy.
Pretty much, I think what everybody goes through when they're, you know, starting out, just throwing my fists up in frustration on those long road trips when you're listening to all your mixes and you just hate everything because your balances are not good. Usually like in the higher end, I don't know why I always had like problems with like vocal shakers, hi-hats, things like that. I just felt like things got a little crazy or there was something hollowing. So just translatability, you know, I wasn't really that keen even on acoustical treatments and things like that. And I think I literally typed in, why do my mixes suck so bad outside the studios in Google? And I found our name. I mean, that's how I got into this. Somehow he popped up when I typed that in. So
it's so funny. You know, you brought up something when you were just saying, you know, what you just said is like when you mix on bad monitors or a horrible monitoring situation, you start to second guess yourself, right? You start to like, does this actually sound good? Because you know you're hitting limitations of your speakers, and so I could absolutely think that that's one of the worst things that happens with bad monitoring situations. You second guess yourself. But Doug, what were some of the problems that you had with your old monitoring system before Phantom Focus?
I wouldn't say that I had a problem as much as I was looking for a different direction to go. I was on Tannoy Golds, the 10s, for 20 plus years, and frankly was really comfortable on them and liked using them to the point that I wasn't necessarily willing to give them up when the Phantom Focus system came in. But 6 weeks after that occurred on this new system, they're gone. And I don't dislike them. The two guys that really influenced me to want to use the Tannoys were Bill Snay and Al Smith, and I have so much respect for their work and the quality of the product that they put out that I wanted to have a system like they had, because what they did was great. I feel like the step up, the clarity, the imaging with the Phantom Focus system far surpasses the Tannoys, and that to me is saying something, because I know a lot of guys that use those and are very happy with them.
Doug, let me ask you, you have a unique situation here that that nobody else has. You had originally, Doug's a real legacy client here, because we had one of the early analog Phantom Focus systems. He was an early adopter on his Tannoys. And then, I don't know, a couple of years ago, we finally bumped you up to the new technology, the new processor and everything. So you had basically a new Phantom Focus system on the Tannoys, and that was a huge step up, as I recall.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just respected Doug's, where he was coming from. You know, he's been, like you said, 25 years, you know, like, how am I going to try and convince somebody to change from that? You know, I'm just going to leave them alone. And I think when we first tuned the Tannoys with the new system, I just said, you know, I think he just said something like, I mentioned, you know, my monitors. I just casually said, you know, I'd like you to hear the Phantom Focus monitor. He says, how could it be better than this? And I said, well, it's just more. And then you came over to the upper deck, which Mike had been, and heard those, and that was the convincer for you. So
it was love.
Let me ask you, what was the difference from going to the, well, I think you already answered the question, going from the Tannoys in the Phantom Focus system to the PFMs in the Phantom Focus system. So you kind of already answered that question.
Yeah, but it was, when I went to the upper deck and heard that system that you'd put in over there, it was jaw dropping. We played, it was a Bruno Mars cut, and
Oh yeah, chunky.
it was 24 karat.
Chunky,
and,
that was the cut, yeah.
Yeah, and Sorbigadea mixed it, and it's a stunning example of engineering, and the clarity, the punch, everything about it was just jaw dropping. And I'm going, this is better than what I have. And again, that's saying something, and that's really what convinced me to make the move to the Phantom Focus.
It's interesting you mentioned him. I was talking to somebody, I can't remember who it was, but you know, they were admirer of him, Servant, and his whole thing is to get it as loud as he can and not have it hurt your ears. And the Bruno Mars album is indicative of that, and that's what I love. I love when I can find a demo cut where I can turn up really loud and it doesn't kill you. And that's his goal. I didn't know that. It makes sense.
That's amazing. And I'm going to tell you my story about the PhantomFocus. But first, before we do that, the first time I heard the PhantomFocus, Richard, what were some of your problems that you had in your room before the PhantomFocus system?
It's an interesting story. I actually was at a crossroads. It's always like I had just built this room, which is a beautiful room. You see it in the back of Mr. Tatz himself, and it was just built.
Where's the coffee machine?
What?
Where's the coffee machine? I'm not going to sit here all. Never mind. Go ahead.
Fine. But we had just built it, and we spent considerable, dough on it, and the final outcome was beautiful. But the sound was good. It was good. It was not bad. It was but I was like, literally this much coin for this much. Okay, good. I'm not cool with that. And actually, and then Carl and I had talked for a year, and he says that happens quite a bit because people, it takes them a moment to make.
Jimmy, how many years did it take for you, Jimmy?
Oh, I don't know, 6 or 7 Christmas cards before.
Oh. It's funny, but I had my rooms tuned by the big guys always for the last 10 years before that. And so I was like literally saying, you cannot just sell me an EQ curve and think I'm going to be impressed. I'm not that guy, I'm sorry. But basically I ran into this problem saying, listen, my wife told me all the time, she's like, you come home from the studio, white-faced, like basically like you're scared. And I'm like, yeah, I'm scared because what I'm hearing outside of this room is not what I just heard for 10 hours. And that's a huge amount of time spent, and it's a waste of confidence. It's a waste of musical energy. And so finally, as I told Carl, literally, like you're my only hope, on a Star Wars reference.
No pressure.
Like if you can't fix this room, I might literally do something different because I cannot live my life in a non-translating room anymore. That is just, I do not want to do that. And he fixed it. So, it's like all the problems that we had, there were like some considerate bass issues. Like I think it was a hole at 70, maybe it was a bump, but I think it was a hole. But it was huge, and he filled it right in with the subwoofers, etc. And it literally transformed this room from like, okay, it's good, I can work here, to like, oh, this is the best room on the West Coast. And I'm not saying that lightly.
That's amazing. Yeah, especially being in Los Angeles. There's some really great rooms out there. That's amazing. That's
There's also
really
a lot of very, very famous rooms that don't sound that great here.
That's true too. Bob, how about you? What were some of the problems that you had?
Well, I mean, my story is probably a little different because the only rooms I've ever had on my own, Carl built. And so I was happy from day one.
Bob's another legacy guy. We started out with the analog stuff with you in that first room in your dining room here.
Yeah. So the purpose for me was when I was living and working in Los Angeles, I didn't have a room of the caliber and PhantomFocus of what Carl is evolved with, but I had a pretty good listening environment, and so I was always a freelance engineer, mixer, and when I came home, I wanted to be able to hear what I did and feel pretty comfortable with it. So when I moved to Nashville, I really didn't have that. I mean, I didn't even really pursue it. So I would be working, freelance at all these rooms. And as Richard just pointed out, a lot of the great studios are not really great mixing environments because they have to be so many things. I mean, they're tracking rooms, they're overdub rooms. They have to be able to take loud, sound pressures. And so they've never really been what I would call, the big studios being real accurate for mixing specifically. So when I had Carl do my first room, it was literally in the dining room of my house, and I called it the dining room. And it wasn't supposed to. I wasn't intending to work in there at all. I was just to have a really good listening environment that I could bring work home from other places. But it started to evolve as budgets were kind of coming down a little bit, and I thought, well, I could do some some things here, some editing, and I could even probably do some mixes if I get some more gear in here. And of course, in those days, most of us were carrying around a lot of racks of support gear. So if I brought my gear home, I actually had pretty much what I brought into any other studio. But that's where it started. Now, the one thing that we really probably hadn't pointed out yet with all this is, so as a freelance mixer, I would be in studios where we would literally be in a studio for weeks mixing, and we'd go into the mixing part of the project with the attitude that we're going to have probably 4 or 5 or 6 days of remix days, because we knew that we were going to get through that first mix, song or two, and then go and hear it in other places and say, well, we've got to compensate and we've got to make changes. And a lot of, oftentimes I'd be just, we were already talked about with, with imaging and everything, where I'd do some things just instinctively, like I might change the EQ on the low end, but not really hear it. I just, from listening to it outside, I'd go, I've got to pump up, this mix a little bit around 80 Hertz or something, but I really wasn't, feeling it inside the control room. So since I evolved and then started using my first room to mix more, and then of course I went into a more elaborate version of that to take it more seriously. One of the things I benefited was being able to get from point A to Z much quicker, because the accuracy was something that all of a sudden I could take a 2-day mix and maybe turn it into an 8-hour mix, or then, and with budgets going down and all that, that was really important,
Speed is really important.
Yeah.
Really important.
So all this is actually probably for all of us added, a lot to our accuracy. And, back in the days of $500,000 record budgets and stuff, nobody really minded if you spent 2 months mixing a record to get it right. That too much these days,
The good old days, the good old days. Hey, before we go any farther, Carl, why don't you explain for the people that have just kind of stumbled upon this, what the PhantomFocus system is? Give us a really good 5-minute rundown on what it is.
Okay, it's in its simplest explanation would be it's a professional reference monitoring system. What does that mean? So I just lost some. Oh, there you are. It's a high-end professional reference monitoring system. It's the hardware included are 2 subwoofers, a digital processor, a pair of monitor stands, and it's a 2-day process that is preceded by discussions with the prospective client, usually on the phone. I'll have them send me pictures just so I understand what the room is, so that we can make sure that it's PhantomFocus ready. And I think all of you have been through that. I just need to understand, especially when it's out of town, I need to understand what it is. So when we go out there, it's not going to be any surprises. It's me and my assistant. And it takes 2 days. The first day is what I call the tracking session, the rhythm section. And that's when we physically mount the subwoofers in the corners. Incidentally, we always use 2 subwoofers because it cancels out the first and third axle null. The subwoofers actually become out of phase with each other at the first and third axle null, so that null that you have at the listening position comes up automatically with no EQ. And that makes a big difference. And a lot of people don't realize that. And the other thing is that the monitor stands are put in with what we call a laser quad system, where we use 4 lasers and we'll get them exactly right. And it's quite a manipulation. It doesn't happen in 15 minutes. And Doug's experienced that. I mean, Doug has a unique space, but we made it work really well. And then the second day, we've gotten so good at it. I mean, it used to be reinventing the wheel every time we did these things, but we've been doing them for, I don't know, well over a decade, 15 years, something like that. And it's been an evolution, but now we've got it so down, you know, we use a template, and usually, you know, at least 95% of the time, just by doing the actual tuning, and we'll hit it out of the park the first time. I might listen to it for a bit, and if I'm noticing some resonance in the room or something, I might do a little tweak, but generally it happens really quickly. We can actually do the whole thing one day sometimes. It just depends whether we run into issues in the physical setup or something. If it's in one of my rooms, it happens pretty fast, but sometimes we have to work in a room that I didn't design, and sometimes there might be issues. And then, but we always allow 2 days, especially when we're out of town, because, you know, we have to make sure we leave enough time. We're not going to leave until it's right. And Richard can tell you that story. Remember when I woke you up on the couch?
Yeah, I do remember.
It's just, we were out there, I think it was at NAM, no, not NAM, it was AES. And I think I'd come out to do a tweak or something, or I don't remember exactly the circumstances.
That happened in the first installation. So it must have been around NAM, because we did it sometime end of January / early February. So it must have been around NAM.
Yeah, it was the night after we went to Musso's, or the night of Musso's. And I woke up at night and I said, it's just not right. I knew it wasn't right. Thank God I don't do that anymore. But it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't even know whether you'd be here, and I would just be there. He was actually there asleep on the couch in his studio.
That's what engineers do. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right. And I don't know what I was thinking. I was, you know, I just went there and I was just thinking, well, maybe it'll be open and I can just go in there and I can do it, you know. I just woke him up. I'm sure he was looking like, what the hell are you doing here? You know, but he didn't miss a beat, and we nailed it.
So the PhantomFocus system is a combination of hardware, and there's some processing, and then there's some tuning that goes into it. So it's truly a system. It's not just a golden box. It's not just, you know, speakers. It's everything has to work together in order to get the PhantomFocus system up.
Installation happens on site. So in other words, you can't get a you know, one of these auto tune boxes. It's never going to do what it does. You know, I mean, you know, you can't, you know, the way we set up the monitors. I mean, we've got this so down, and just through lots of experimentation and just evolution, we just realize what works, and in a lot of ways we simplify it as we go along, because we've never failed. I mean, we just bat 1,000 on it, and I care so much about it to make for that result, and that's why, I mean, I design, you know, some beautiful studios, but I wouldn't design any of them if I didn't have the PhantomFocus system, because that's the biggest thrill. So I can look at somebody's face the first time. You know, it's very typical. You know, if I'm behind them, they'll swing around and look at me like I'm crazy. You know.
Well, I will tell you that all the hard work that you do pays off, because I'm going to tell you, I was filming. I have a web series called Spaces, AudioNowcast Spaces, where we travel around the world and we get tours of different studios, and it's a little bit of travel and it's a little bit of studio, and I had talked to Carl, and Carl invited me up to the Upper Deck studio.
Videos are terrific, by the way. I'll send them to you if you haven't seen them. I think, Doug, you've seen them. But, he does terrific work.
Thank you. So I go to Upper Deck Studios, which you know, to me, it was just it's a phenomenal studio. Just what you had to overcome just in the tracking room and how great it sounded was amazing. And so Carl says, I want to introduce you. I want you to hear the PhantomFocus system. Now, Carl, he's a good talker. Carl can make anything sound fantastic. He has that gift of gab. So I go in there, and I've heard a lot of monitoring systems. Being a post-production mixer, I've had the demo over at Dolby Atmos and Dolby and all kinds of stuff. So I sit down, and he puts me right in the middle, and he starts to play his system. And I was blown away, because the first thing I noticed is not just the imaging, but the depth that you get from listening to a PhantomFocus, a mix on a PhantomFocus system. I could see into the mix. It was dimensional. It had not just the spread, but it had depth. Unlike anything I've heard before. And it just blew me away. I literally, it's one of the few times where I've just been so impressed by a system, by a technology. I was just, it was, I'm such an audio geek. I mean, I could have just stayed there all day, just listening to all my favorite music over and over again, because it sounded so great. And that was my first introduction to the PhantomFocus system. And I wonder, like, you guys, like, Doug, do you remember the first time that you heard the PhantomFocus system? I mean, I know you mentioned a little bit, but tell us a little bit about that story.
The first time that he knocked my socks off and got me to leave my tannoys was the upper deck, which you just talked about. And I don't remember before that.
Well, I think you listened a little bit over to the Blue Grotto.
Oh yeah, you're right.
You were kind of tied up. They were doing that video, so you weren't really paying that much attention on things.
But Mike, you're exactly right. The depth of field is what is just so shocking, I guess, is for me. You feel like, okay, I get panning something hard left and right, but to have it go deep like that, it's just so satisfying to be able to hear good music that way.
I mean, your reverbs, for me, reverb just means a whole new thing, right? It just becomes a whole new thing. Like, Jimmy, do you remember the first time you heard the PhantomFocus system, and what was your experience?
Yeah, also Blue Grotto. I think most people end up there that are shopping. Yeah, I had gone over there for was like an A&R thing for one of my buddy's bands. I was like, well, I'm in Nashville, so I've been getting all these Christmas cards from this guy Carl, and I knew I wanted to do it, but I was leasing a space that I had kind of retrofit into a studio, and I said, I'm not going to do it unless I'm going to build it and own the building, which we ended up finally doing. So I designed the space and went over there, and I said, okay, in my mind, if I like this, I'm gonna get ready to write a check. If I don't, if it's not everything that he's claiming it is and what I think I need and all that, then I'll keep doing what I was doing, which was like a combination of just looking and stalking him and all these white papers and AES things, and you could find these little transcripts, and then it's like, okay, if the speaker's this many inches, and so I had kind of done everything that I could.
The graphs, right? The graphs. You have all those graphs.
Without actually having him come there, I mean, I even bought the Argosy. I have a different desk now, but I had bought like the Argosy desk. I'd already bought the Soundacre stands. Like, I figured out who was just supplying his speaker stands. I had it all except for the speakers that he installed, the subs, and then all that. So I went over there, and I brought one of my friends with me, and we had just come from Dark Horse, I think it was. I was not a fan at all of their main room. I thought it was tinny, and he was cranking it up, and I was like, not a fan. So then we went from Dark Horse to the Blue Grotto, and I sat down and I just had my ears blown back, and I was like, well, that's okay. That all the things you guys are saying, the imaging, and some of the Nora Jones cuts he had done, some other ones, the vocals were just, you know, focused. It's the PhantomFocus system. I feel like it was just like she was just speaking to me right in front of my face. But so that's all well and good, but I'm not here to listen to, you know, chart topping hits. I mean, that it sounds great, but I want to hear one of my mixes that I know has had problems, and like subtle problems. Like there was a funk record. I just met Carl on that trip. We went there and I said, is it cool if I go on Dropbox and download a cut? I just worked on it. He said, yeah, let me hear. And I cranked it up a little bit at the grotto, and, you know, just all the horns hit and all the vocals. And there was a part where there's like 10 or 15 seconds of horns and intro, and it's just slamming, and all of a sudden the lead vocal comes in. And when I had mixed that in my room, I had thought the vocals were perfect. And then every time I would listen to it elsewhere, I felt like they were just not quite there. Like something was going on in the mids or something where they were plenty loud on my system, but never hit right anywhere else. And that's what happened in the grotto. It finally was like, oh, and that's where I was like, take my money. Like, let's do this. Cause if I can hear that here, then I know it's telling me what I didn't hear elsewhere. And that's the truth. So.
That's great. You know, there's nothing like a monitoring system that shows you your mistakes. You know, it's one thing to listen to speakers and, oh, everything I make sounds great. But it's, you know, when you listen to a pair of speakers that's honest, that's you know, that's where you really get your bang for your buck. Bob, how about you? Do you remember the first time you heard the PhantomFocus system?
Well, you know, I can tell I go pretty far back here. So
Yeah, Bob goes way back.
yeah, way back. So to kind of zero in on that, you know, and what you guys are talking about, I mean, that's a big part of this whole conversation, is that, like in my system, and I'm sure it's the same for all of you, a bad sounding record sounds bad, you know, on a PhantomFocus system. I mean, the idea isn't for just to make everything sound great, whether it's not. We're talking about the accuracy, and the accuracy is what, you know, helps your workflow so much, because for all of us, we've all experienced, you know, being the mix down, doing things and really satisfied when we all leave the studio, and then we take it around to some other places or go to our favorite mastering house and say, wow, you know, we just got fooled again, you know? So, I mean, that's what we're really talking about, is we're talking about, you know, a system that Carl designs, and it's not even really just the speakers by any, that's just one component. It's the complete system. So even when I had, you know, my favorite speakers that I would take around to studios, and even my own amp, they still sounded different and led me in different directions in different studios, because the room environment was different, you know. So I really go back to when Carl had a studio called Recording Arts. Doug, did you ever work there at Recording Arts?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what kind of started the whole thing for me was I was working all over. I was freelance, and I was, you know, becoming an encyclopedia of Nashville, of working in literally every studio. And I started working at Carl's Recording Arts, and Carl had taken this house, and basically, this was before really any of us had home studios, and taken this house, and because of being so meticulous of the control room monitoring, I would go in and with clients, and we would mix things at Carl's, and we'd feel like we were really right on the money with this. And this is, you know, quote, a home studio, and we're not having to go into mastering and we
that was like the birth of the PhantomFocus system kind of happened there.
Yeah, and so
I didn't have any processing or anything, but I was working with positioning and stuff.
Yeah, and he was constantly working at it, you know, and it was just really impressive. And so that's when I started. I wasn't intending to have a studio. I just thought, you know, well, I'm going to see if Carl, because he was talking about doing all this stuff. And I said, I'll see if Carl would, you know, build me a listening environment that, you know, even though I'm going to be working at other studios, because I used to work in different studios. I mean, I remember there was a month of February I actually worked in 19 different rooms in
I, that sounds like a nightmare.
Literally, yeah.
19.
I remember that because I remember one of my assistants was telling me, you realize that, last month we worked here in 19 rooms because I had my gear being moved to this place to be mixing one day or 2 days and then tracking somewhere and all that. And it's
Bob was on the
harder than
cusp of Jimmy Bowen and the Mitsubishi 3200. He was like one of the top guys, top picks in Nashville for years.
Wow.
So, we were always flying around. So again, I kind of went back to Carl's, accuracy of his home room. And that's how I started with PhantomFocus, is the analog version of it, but with just a playback system that I could really feel good about, which led to my second studio, which that I think actually, we did that, Carl, I think about the time that you did Blue Grotto, because I think I went and listened to the Blue Grotto.
Yeah, you had the new technology.
Yeah, and that was when we evolved to the next thing. The Blue Grotto kind of blew my mind, and so we went there. But for me, it all takes me back to, I was very fortunate as a young startup engineer, to work with bands like Steely Dan, and what I learned from that experience back then with like Roger Nichols and Donald Fagen and those records still sound fantastic, but they would literally take a control room that we were recording in and getting the vibe and capturing things, and then they would basically remodel it, not physically, but remodel it for mixing. I mean, bring in like Magnaplanar speakers and different amps and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden the mix room became like this, what was the little Visonic little Davids? And it became like this state-of-the-art like audiophile system, instead of the big flame-throwing boomer speakers and all that for volume. And then that's where I really started learning. That was all the way back in the early 70s, but it started learning that, that mixing is a different process, So anyway, that's how that all began with me. So Carl's room showed me how that could be done, in a home, and then now I'm on my third studio. So.
Wow. So you were there in the whole evolution of the whole thing, which, out of that whole story, that was amazing with the 19 studios. I bet your reference CD just got worn out going from studio to studio to studio.
It was ridiculous. We moved around a lot in those days. You have multiple clients, and so you track for a couple days with one client, and then jump over to another place and do vocals with somebody else, and so it was very hard to really wrap your head around what you were listening to when you were mixing. So.
Wow, that was amazing. Richard, how about you? First time you heard a PhantomFocus system? Tell us about it.
Well, the funny part is the first time I heard it was here.
That's right.
That's right. And it's also, actually, for that matter, it's the last time I heard it, because it's the only one I ever heard.
You haven't left.
Because, when Carl and I were talking about that, and I was like, it costs how much? And he was like, yeah, but you gotta like it.
It was cheap back then.
Whatever. I was like, literally, I'm there like, this is my last hooray. You either fix this or I'm going home and become a baker or something. And so I was like, because he was like, I'll get you on some frequent flyer miles and fly you to Nashville. And I'm like, A, I don't have time for that. And B, I believe that you can do it. I just don't know if it's right for me. So that's it. So there was a little bit of a Hail Mary, and actually I asked him to do it with ProAx, but at the time he wanted to have active speakers. I think that changed over the years, but this is why I still have ProAx standing there, because I would have asked him to do it with ProAx to begin with, but we ended up with these Twin 6Bs, which are beautiful in hindsight. So it's the same thing, everything you guys said. Like, once I heard it, first I was a little confused. It was like, what is happening? There's no speakers anymore, because that's what Carl says. Basically, you don't hear the speaker anymore, and I felt like that too, because you basically you kind of knew what a speaker sounded like before, and afterwards it sounds like a totally different thing. So that's confusing for a moment. You have to get used to it. but the information is all there. And actually, at this point, I have not card checked the mix in probably 8 years. I just don't do that.
Yeah,
Wow.
there's
Like
a
every
curve,
time,
there's a curve, you know, and some people it takes them a little while, and some people that they figure it out overnight. But you have to unlearn all your bad habits.
Wow.
you have to realize that you basically have to be open to the idea that, oh, there's music coming at you in an very unalterated state, just in the way what's on the tape is coming at you, which is always one equation less than we had to do beforehand, even with my favorite speakers, which are the Pro Amps.
Well, you know, you brought up a very interesting point, and I think I'm going to ask all the guys on the panel. Um, so now you have this amazing monitoring system. How has that modified your workflow? Because I could only imagine now that you have a whole new way of listening to things that you can't do things the old way. So what were some of the things that you noticed that changed in your workflow? I'll start with you, Jerry.
Well, for me, it's just, I don't think I really change how I work. I mean, I've always kind of start with the kick and then the bass, and then I kind of go in with the vocals, and then I start filling in things like hard pan stuff. That didn't change, but what did change was the amount of time. I mean, workflow for me is, you know, I don't have, you know, huge artists on big budgets coming in. I'm mostly a local market, which is now expanded to like 3 states kind of surrounding. I kind of handle like Washington, Idaho, and Lewiston and Oregon and those kind of places. But I have to get it done very quickly, and I have to do it for very, very inexpensively, because it's like a quantity thing, right? It's like I have to do an album in like 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, from tracking to mastering. That's how I do what I do. So the workflow is, when it comes in, when I'm tracking and I'm hearing it through here, and I hear the kick drum, and I'm making choices and head choices and mic placement, it's trust that that's what it is and move on. And then same thing with mixing, like this EQ choice I'm making and this mastering choice I'm making, it is the truth, and I'm going to move on. And, you know, like Richard said, I don't have time to do car tests and have time to, you know, give me your notes back and all the things that I sucked on, and we'll fix it. And because I have another band coming in like next Monday. So my workflow has been from tracking to mastering, because I do it all. I know a lot of people frown on that, but I literally can do that on this system. So that's my workflow. It's just trust and quickness and speed, and move on with your life. Make
That's
money.
amazing. That, you know what, right there, that's actually, like you said, make money. And the fact that you trust it, so you don't have to second guess. Like, you know, how many times, I can't tell you how many times I've mixed something and I've had like 3 alts on the vocal. Like, I love this vocal, but maybe it's not right there. Let me try another one, and then you save that and you go to another vocal. But it's so great to, like, no, boom, you just know it's going to sound good, and you know it's going to sound right. That's pretty awesome. Doug, what about you? How has it affected your workflow?
I would agree with Jimmy. It's a speed thing. You're just able to get what you know is right so much faster, and that's everybody's winning at that point. The client's happier, I'm happier. It doesn't take 18 hours in a day. You know, you're able to know what you've got early on and be really confident about how it is and how it will translate. And
How about you?
Carl,
Go ahead.
if you're not using Richard's line of "you're not hearing the speakers anymore," I mean, that's it. You're not going, "Oh, I love those speakers." You're going, "I love what I'm hearing," and and you just realize this isn't about those speakers. This is about all of this, and that's great.
Source.
That's amazing. How about you, Bob? Has it affected your workflow any? I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
it's been your whole workflow. So
yeah, I mean, I think I kind of touched on a little bit, but I could say ditto to, you know, to everybody so far. I mean, because that's crucial. I mean, really, I don't think any of us are working with big budgets anymore. I mean, all of this, the way we work now has become crucial to being able to, you know, exist in a ever changing music industry. And we're all, expected to, get results, but at a fraction of the, time that, people were able to use. I could say even for myself. I mean, I worked on records that would spend a couple of months mixing the record, and it came out pretty good, but it really should have, if you had a couple of months to mix it. But, but now if you're talking about, someone says they play you some classic, Steely Dan record or whatever, or Tubes or something like that, and say, yeah, I'd like what I'm doing to sound like that, but I've got a budget for like 4 days to mix it. I go, well, I know you played me this song. I happened to, work on that. We spent, 4 days mixing that song,
What is the whole album they want?
Yeah, they want a whole album, So I'm going, there is a little bit of a difference of time here, but working with a system like this has actually helped with that evolution, because I feel also like I don't want to cut the quality of what I do, but I feel like everybody else has just said, the system I'm working on now allows me to make more accurate decisions without fumbling through it. And because that's probably an important part of all this. I think anyone that works in a recording studio long enough, say to record and to mix, eventually is going to master what they want to hear, even if it's just psyching themselves out with compensation, saying, well, I know I need to make this, brighter than I think it should be, so it'll translate everywhere else. I don't think any of us want to work that way anymore. I think we want to be able to just say, I want it to be big and full and clear, and I want to hear what the reverb time is really doing, and I want the monitoring system to be accurate. So yeah, I think we've all probably saved, a lot of time and kept the quality of our work more consistent.
Well, I just got two more questions for you guys, and then we'll be wrapping up the roundtable. And the first one is, does anybody have a can they recall a client experience that you may have had when you've played a mix in your studio, back when you could play a mix in your studio? Anybody have any great stories like that?
Well, I've got several. I mean, someone else want to go first, but I mean, I find it amusing, really, that, well, I mean, usually when people come in and listen, their first reaction is I'll stand behind them, and then they'll it'll be over, and they'll look at me and just have that wow, thing. Not necessarily because of my work. I'm not, taking all that credit, saying, but because the system, they heard everything that's in there. They heard everything that was going on in their voice or their part they played. And then it's gone to where I've literally had to boot people out after a while, because then they want to just keep listening to more and more and more. It's like, it's just such ear candy to listen, in these studios. And most people these days don't really get the opportunity to hear the music that they love so much. Even records aren't even their own material, but just other stuff that they're fans of, and they hear it in one of these systems, and it's, for all of us audiophiles, it's just it's really engaging. It's just something you just want to listen all day long. So that's kind of been my experiences anyway. So
yeah, it's truly ear candy. How about you, Richard? Do you have any you ever brought a client in there and they just been blown away by what they hear?
Well, I mean, when they come here, let's start this with a different kind of note. Because I'm confident in the system, because I actually know it will tell me everything, I basically know, I know that what I'm about to play is gonna blow them away. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. I'm not like hoping they like it. I'm like, I know if I did my job, this is gonna sound amazing, right? That's and awesome. So then they sit down and I'm like, okay, you guys ready? They're like, cool. They play it. Now here's the thing. They don't know the system. They don't know anything about it. So actually what this does for me is make me look like a young god every time. They don't understand that this is
that's awesome.
You fool them. Good speakers. They just go like, oh, snap, this sounded awesome, right? And which is exactly what we want. It's the opposite 100%. Of going to great commercial room that you go like, I hope this thing sounds good today because I really don't know. Because I know even though it's $2,000 a day here, I cannot trust that it's an amazing room.
Yeah.
That has all gone out the window. So that's what I'm trying to say. Like what this does for me is the confidence of like, if I have it together, if I did it, I know this is gonna be great. Now, I have actually since then, I've never had a person in the studio going like, "Oh, yo, Richard, that's not it." I never had that since. I had.
So good.
Of course, we have notes. That's a different
Right.
story.
Oh,
Nobody
yeah,
will go like, "What the heck happened here?" You know.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
that's a lot. If you're a freelance engineer, you know how terrible that can
Oh
be,
my gosh. Yeah.
especially when you know you did something well and you're at the mercy of some playback system. That is why actually I don't want to be, I never want to be in a room of a producer who listens to my work on his speakers, because I would just sit there and go like, oh, I don't know what this is gonna sound like. And this is not about translation. This is about what's going on in this room that I have absolutely no control over. That could actually cost me the gig right now.
Yeah.
And that being out the window makes you feel effortless.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's, you know what, you brought up a great point though, because you really, you want the speakers to disappear like they do, and you want your mix to stand out, because there's nothing worse. I was with a friend of mine. He was in a recording studio in Virginia Beach, and I'm not going to say anything, not going to mention any words, but he was mixing, and the client came in, and it didn't go well. It was not good, and so
Worse.
that's, you know, and to be honest, it was, I think part of it was the mixing environment that they had. So that's a great point. Jimmy, how about you? Any great client stories?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a number of female country singer songwriter types that one in particular named Valerie. She was a cancer survivor, and you know, she had to have a double vasectomy, and she just got started in music late. Like, she's always been a good singer, but she never really went for it. You know, she's just been kind of palling around the local venues and church and stuff. And she decided to team up with another songwriter, and they wrote this song Rainbow After the Storm, and they came in and she blew me away. First of all, she's got an amazing voice. She's got pipes for days. Her song actually went to the like Christian country charts and like top. And for me, it was like, I've never been on really any charts ever. I'm in Spokane, Washington. We just put stuff on Spotify and call it good. But anyway, she had sung her song. We'd done all the comps. We'd done everything. The band was good. And I mixed it, and I had her come in and sit down, and she just kind of, the song had ended, and it was like that kind of silence for a few seconds. And I realized that she was crying. You know, she was literally just overwhelmed. That kind of feeling like we get. We're audiophiles, so we listen to music and we're like, wow, that was amazing. But for her, she heard her song back and all the struggle and all that, and it just sounded the way it does on a PhantomFocus system. She just broke it. It kind of makes me kind of like almost tear up just thinking about it right now. But you know, she's got mascara running down her face, and it's the power of that system to hear it. You're not hearing it. You're having an emotional experience, and her experience just came through the speakers exactly how I wanted it to. And that was probably one of the memorable ones. And it happens more than I think I even realized. People just sit down like they've never been in a studio before. They have a lot of talent, and we do the thing and we mix it, and they sit down and they just kind of like, you know, kind of lose it a little bit. So those are the times where I like I know that because of that system, they're having that experience. Because if I had it on my old Adams, you know, it wouldn't be that. I mean, it might be in a fine mix. They're like, oh, thank you so much, but it wouldn't be like fireworks and tears. You know, it's like, so those are the things that kind of stand out to me.
That's fantastic. When you can make that, your client have that emotional connection to your work, that's there's nothing better than that. Doug, how about you?
Yeah, the part for me is having a client be knocked out with it, and to take it further, the biggest compliment to me is when they go, okay, I got three things. I want the guitar lick up, you know, in the second chorus, and I want the drums to be bigger going into the key change, and that's it. And that's all they can figure out, just to try and get a little more emotion out of the mix going on. It's not, hey, solo the vocal for me and let me hear what's going on. I mean, we all know what's going on, and it's really easy to achieve a really solid, great mix in short order with very few tweaks. And even for the people that aren't able to come to the studio for the mix, I'm emailing stuff out, and I feel really confident about, you know, whatever you're listening on, this is going to translate and you're going to be pleased with the end product. So that to me is the ultimate compliment, is the much shorter list of, hey, here's some fixes I've got.
That's fantastic. Well, hey, listen, guys, we're going to start to wrap this up. I just want to do really quick, and you don't have to, it doesn't have to be anything long and elaborate, but if there's somebody on the fence about, you know, whether or not they should go with the PhantomFocus system or not, what would you tell them to kind of push them over that fence into the monitoring system that you guys all enjoy every day? And I'll start with you, Bob. What would you tell them to convince them that this is just amazing?
Well, I mean, for me, you know, some of this is pretty selfish, really. I mean, you know, one of my early mentors was Roger Nichols, and he was just a fabulous engineer. I mean, it was, you know, with working with him and especially Donald Fagen, you know, they everything was important, everything. And Roger said to me one time, and I realized it was the same, you know, a thing that drew me into the production part of things and engineering from, you know, from being a guitar player and wanting to really be in the studio control room, is he did that because he wanted to hear music at its source, like where it was. Like if he would if he was going to go to the movies, he'd want to go to, you know, Warner Brothers, to the soundstage where they're mixing the movie, you know. And I always thought, yeah, that's really what's drawing us to this, is that we're actually listening to the music the way it's intended to be listened to. You know, the end user, you know, Lord knows how they're listening to it. Back in the day of analog speakers, stuff, you know, out of phase speakers, whatever, tone controls turned all the way up, but we were actually there getting to listen to the music as it was intended. So I've always carried that with me. So even it's been a continuous quest all these decades, is that when I sit in my control room, is really the only place I care to listen to music. But it's selfish, because I just want to be able to hear what I think the accuracy of what people really probably intended. So that's what I would say to anyone that wants to do this for a living or for pleasure or whatever. If you really want to hear music the way it was intended to be heard, you need a system that's going to do that. And so it's a passion for me, you know, I guess, and probably for all of us here.
Richard, how about you? What would you tell a person who's kind of on the fence?
I think it's pretty easy, actually. You know, everybody you talk to, engineers, producers, musicians, especially people now, everybody has a home studio of varying sizes and quality. Everybody is going like with that, what speakers should I buy? What can you recommend to me? You know, and to me, that question already is kind of silly and dumb, but that's a different conversation. But I'm just like, everybody understands this whole thing, but I bought the HS5s, I bought the Genelecs, I bought the whatever, and I'm never done. I'm never done. They all have issues where they stand in my room, which is of course not the speaker's fault at all. But the Quest, they're all so familiar with. And the answer is literally, you know, like, could you imagine a world where you don't have to do that math math in your head all the time, going like, oh yeah, but it's a little bright and it's a little bit this and a little bit that, and here's 3 other speakers that you have to double check and find like inverses of your speakers off in order to get like a better sampling of the overall average. Can you imagine to have all of that thrown out the window? Then you need to talk to Carl.
That's amazing. All right, Jimmy, you got to follow that one up.
My answer is I'm too competitive. I don't tell people what to do.
Yeah, I should have said that one. Don't talk about.
I think Carl recently had a guy who was starting to email him, and
very
then he was
bad
emailing
experience.
me. What's that?
I said it was a very bad experience.
I don't know how it ultimately ended up, but I the first thing I asked Carl was, how far away is he? Like, just somebody who's in my town? Because if it is, like, no, we're not having him over here. I like making money. I like being the best in my town. I'm a big fish in a small pond. What do you want? I don't tell anybody what to do. I'm like, yeah, you should go get those little RLX panels and stick them on your ceiling.
That's the best answer ever. That's so honest.
The commercial studio people would jump on it because, you know, all the people that clients that I've had that have home studios, they have much better monitoring than these, you know, major rooms. But the major rooms just have like an attitude. And I'm not knocking them. I mean, they're wonderful and I have high respect for them. But their monitoring could be so much better. But they think they're already there, you know.
Well, thank God they don't have good monitoring, or else these guys would be out of work.
Hey, just Doug, fine. I don't know.
No, I know. Hey, Doug, what would you tell somebody who's on the fence?
Well, I'd have them come over, because it really ultimately is the hearing is believing situation. Bring over something you know backwards and forwards, something you've mixed, or a record that you just love, and have a seat. And in half an hour, that's the whole sales pitch, because it just works. And it's not like Richard was saying, that there are a lot of great speakers out there, a lot of great manufacturers, but this is so much more than that. It's not just, hey, put these boxes in and turn them up and you're good. This is put this system in and let it adapt to your space, and it's incredible. And that's the confidence. The back to Chase with what Bob mentioned earlier, I think so much of what we all have now is a space of our own that we know well and really don't mix anywhere else. You know, Bob doesn't want to go to 19 different rooms anymore, and I don't either. Man, we both kept cartage in business back in those days. And it's
it was different from you because you had a cartage company.
Well, yeah.
But you had a rental company. Fine for you.
To have a room that you are in and you know and you trust, it's your workflow is so much faster and so much better, I think, ultimately. So that I'd say show up. I'll hearing is believing.
Well, I think that's great. That's a great way to sum it all up, is hearing is believing. And I will say that, you know, I don't have a PhantomFocus system, so I am so jealous of each and every one of you guys there. But I don't know how you guys would ever leave that room, because it's such a joy and pleasure to listen to music. And what Bob said is, you know, you become selfish. You get to hear music the way it's supposed to be. I just want to thank all you guys for joining us on this PhantomFocus Roundtable. And Carl, if someone out there wants to get in touch with you for, you know, they have questions or they want a demo, how can they get in touch with you?
They can email me at Tatz Design, or they can go to Carl Tatz Design, the website.com, or PhantomFocus.com. Those are the two websites, and they're interconnected. So I'm pretty easy to find, and be happy to answer any questions. I have people call me all the time, and I'm glad to just give them some advice, if nothing more than that.
All right. Well, hey, I just want to remind everybody, if you're in Spokane and you want to have your record mixed or produced by Jimmy, you
Jimmy's
can reach
really
him
good. Jimmy's
at
really
Amplified
good.
Wax. And then if you're in Los Angeles, you could go to the Mix House Studios with Richard. And in
Richard,
Nashville,
one of his um, records we use as a demo, PhantomFocus system.
that's
Oh, right.
fantastic.
In the
And,
area.
India Re, yeah.
Yeah.
and then if you're in Nashville, you can look up Doug at Uno Mas Studios and Bob at Cool Springs Mix. Both those are in Nashville. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. And for myself and Carl and the guys, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Bye.